I'm Calen. I'm an assistant professor of teaching at the university, and I've been at it for 10 years. Taught a lot of the 1010 and 1020. I also teach a little bit of the 3603 and 3604. But I think today we're talking about 1010. Is that correct? So one of the things that you'll obviously have questions about first year as a TA is handling attendance. And I'll just talk about my rules for that, my best practices that work for me, um, and we'll go through that. So some of the basics are, how do you take attendance, and what works for me. What's worked for me over the years is just doing the note card method. So on the first day of class, I'm going to have all of the students fill out a note card. It's going to have their preferred name and their last name on it, and then whatever information about them I'm interested in. That changes from year to year. Usually I'll have them give me their hometown, their major if they've got one decided, and then something, whatever strikes me that day. What is your favorite video game growing up? What shows do you like to watch? Things like that. And that allows me to kind of memorize their names, which I think is big early on. And that becomes my attendance through mechanism throughout the semester. I'll just write on the back of that card if they're not in there that day, right? I sort them just in the first 10 minutes of class. And that way I don't have to manually take roll or call names. Once I've got the names memorized, then I've got that in place for the semester. The question of tardiness, right? Especially in the instance of a student coming in 30 minutes late. For me, and I don't know how unusual I am in that, but if a student comes in 30 minutes late, I'm going to say, happy to see you. I'm glad you're here. No sarcasm, no irony, no whatsoever. I always think that it's important to provide a welcoming environment for students. And so for a one-off or an occasional thing, it's not going to be an issue at all. I'm going to be happy to see every student come into class, regardless of when they show up. The difference would be if it's habitual, right? If a student is constantly coming into class late, I think that can disrupt the learning environment. It can make students that are there on time every day feel kind of silly, like, why am I even trying? And in those instances, I try to talk to the student privately and figure out what's going on here. Like, what's the issue with you coming in late? Can we solve that? And 9 times out of 10, that takes care of it. That student realizes that they are out of line, and they're going to rectify the situation. So that's, I don't really take attendance, or excuse me, tardiness personally. I try not to take anything personally, and I prioritize kind of welcoming students whenever they show up. If a student emails me in advance and lets me know about their absence, I'm going to reply, thanks for the heads up, and that's going to be that, right? I emphasize at the beginning of the semester that you have a certain amount of absences built in. I don't really differentiate between excused or unexcused absences. This is college, right? The only time that students have a true excused absence is if they're on official university business or they have some sort of medical emergency. And so I let students know right off the bat, you don't have to let me know. If you'd like to let me know, if that makes you feel better, it's fine. It's polite. It's an okay thing to do, but I'm not going to spend a lot of my time and effort kind of communicating with students about their absences, right? So the another question is about that attendance policy. The standard attendance policy for the Monday, Wednesday, Friday class is that at 3 or more absences, you knock a letter grade off of their final. At six or more, they can or more than 6, they fail the class. My experience with attendance over the years is that typically I can't remember the last time I failed a student for attendance alone, because if a student is not attending at that level, they're typically not turning in work, and they fail the class kind of organically. I think it's important to establish the expectation that you're going to be in class, that class time is useful, is valuable, is productive. But I don't really do kind of official mechanical grade things with their attendance. You know, like I said, I can't remember the last time I failed a student on attendance, because those issues kind of coincide with attendance issues coincide with not turning in work. And so if anything, that's my own kind of policy. That's my own take, is that I used to, when I first started off, really agonize about those sorts of things and do a lot of fiddling with the grades. And over the years, I've noticed that there's not a lot of divergence at all between students who are chronically absent and students who just stop turning in work. So I just don't worry about it all that much anymore, to be honest. I do think that one of the questions on this sheet that I'm looking at is, for example, if a student misses more than X classes, do you have a meeting with them and talk about it? That used to be an important part of the practice, is getting in touch with students that are absent. Nowadays, I think that the early intervention program has kind of taken that over and actually works really well. And so I would encourage you to submit all of your early intervention reports, because that serves that function of letting the student know, hey, we miss you in class. We notice when you're gone. It allows their advisor to reach out to them. And so when that first started, I took it as kind of an insult to my dignity, right? As this kind of bureaucratic thing that I had to do. But I've made my peace with it, and I see it as a useful thing to do now. And because I've had it work for several students, I think it's nice for them to, it's not nice they don't enjoy it, but it's healthy for them to hear from you and from their advisor when they're racking up absences, especially early in the semester. Right? A question on here about grading and attendance is, what grade do you give students who do not come to class but submit all assignments? And in my experience, that's a total hypothetical. I've never experienced that. I've never had a student who does not come to class and still submits all of their work. So in my mind, I'll cross that bridge when I get there, right? It's been my experience that if they stop coming to class, they stop turning in work. A question that's kind of on that theme is, what do you do with the student that drops out of the class for a couple of weeks and then comes back and says, what do I have to do to finish up this semester successfully? And I might be a little bit of a pushover here, because I typically say, okay, we're going to meet X amount of times in office hours. We're going to get these assignments turned in. And if you do all that, then you can have a successful semester. Most of the time, I would say 7 or 8 times out of 10, that student is still not going to do it. They're not going to catch up. They're not going to meet with you to get any sort of remedial instruction. But for the students that do, for whatever reason, they had some disaster in the semester, and it may not even be anything medical or familial. It's just they had a hard time with their first semester in college. And if they're willing to meet with me and work with me, get their stuff done, get caught up, I'm happy to do that for them. I don't feel like that's something you should feel obligated to do, but that's my practice, right? How do I reflect students' attendance in the final grade? That is, for me, that's all about the in-class assignments, the in-class writing. I do a lot of in-class writing. I do a lot of homework writing that's on the discussion boards. And so that's one of the few things I do not allow students to turn in late. Once that discussion board is closed, which I usually keep it open a day, 2 days after that class period. Once that discussion board is closed, then that they miss the opportunity for those points, right? I may drop at the end of the semester the lowest grade. I may not, just depending on how many I've done that semester. And so that's how the attendance gets reflected in the grades, right? Those are all low stakes, easy writing assignments. You show up, you put in the work, and you get the credit. And so that's where the attendance pays off directly in the grades. Right? What advice to communicate with students whose attendance is poor? Like I said, I've become a big fan of the early intervention. I think that's a great tool for communication. If a student reaches out to me because they are concerned about how many classes they've missed, I have found that many students kind of get into a guilt spiral about missing class, that they miss a week, and then they are so stressed about coming back to class because they think that you, the professor, are going to be mad at them, disappointed in them, that becomes an impediment for getting back to class. So that would be my advice for when students are reaching out to you about the missed classes, is that's my practice, is to try to allay those fears, right? That no, I'm not mad at you. No, you're not in trouble. You do need to come to class. You do need to work in order to have a successful semester. But I'm not going to point this out to you in class. I'm not going to humiliate you in any way. I'm more than happy to have you come back and join in the regular flow of things. And so I think that, like I said, for the students that have some sort of legitimate issue come up, and they want to have a successful semester, I think they need to hear that that you're not in any trouble other than the fact that you've got to do the work to have a good semester. And then as far as improving students' attendance in general, it's been my experience in 1010 and 1020 that you're going to have students that just disappear, right? And there's nothing you can do about it, right? You can kind of all of your standard kind of pedagogical practices of fostering a safe classroom, a comfortable classroom, an engaging classroom. I think that's as far as you can go with encouraging student attendance. Is use the class time wisely, make sure they're doing productive things, make sure that they have kind of a comfortable environment with their peers and with you, and that's what will make the ones who are kind of those borderline cases, can take it or leave it, show up. You have people on either end. There are students that are going to attend no matter what. You could be having the worst semester ever, be the most unpleasant professor in the world, they're still going to show up. And you're going to have the students on the other end that are going to, for whatever reason, disappear a few weeks in, and you'll never see them again, right? But as far as encouraging attendance, I think just good classroom practice does that for you, right? So we've got another section on here on assignments and kind of handling some of the issues around that. One of the questions is, how do you communicate with students who do not submit an assignment on time, right? This is, I may be speaking from a position. I teach 4 classes a semester, right? So I have a lot of students turning in a lot of assignments. And at this point, I don't communicate with them if they don't turn in an assignment on time. If they reach out to me and they say, Professor, I had this or that come up, I need a few extra days, I'll give them a few extra days. I'm never haggling with the student over whether or not their excuse for turning in an assignment late qualifies, right? I will give them a few extra days, no questions asked. But I don't have the time or the energy to hunt down or email or talk with every student that doesn't turn in an assignment, right? Some of that is just on them. Yeah, I don't have a special late paper policy or rules. I use the standard one of you can turn it in. I have the due date on Canvas, and then the date that the box closes, right? And so I usually set that up so that the box closes at midnight of the next class day. And so that's just that standard late policy for major assignments. Like I said, I don't accept in-class assignments that are late, right? What grade do I give a paper that does not relate to the assignment at all? That's a good question, right? Typically, I don't grade it. I give them a comment on their in their section that I try not to be negative, but I say, what you've got here is a good paper, but it doesn't relate to, the prompt. Can you meet with me during my office hours, and we'll talk about how to get this back on track. And so, yeah, I don't typically grade those. If I realize halfway through that they're submitting a paper that is completely off base, then I want to get in touch with that student and see what's going on. If the students plagiarize, plagiarism is one of those issues that comes up occasionally. I think that for me, I draw the line in plagiarism. I do not consider plagiarism to be inadequate citation or anything that could be a legitimate mistake. I don't treat that as plagiarism. I treat that as an issue of student knowledge. Maybe they don't know how to do it. Maybe they didn't catch that in their proofreading, right? And so I'll indicate that to them, and I may even penalize their grade somewhat. But I'm treating that as a technical error, as an error in student writing rather than an issue of plagiarism. Now, you do have students that plagiarize in order to, hoodwink you, trick you, get credit for something that's not their work. That's rarer, but it does happen. The most common version of that I run into, and even that version is rare, is where a student will turn in an entire paper, right, that has been submitted previously in this school or in another school that comes up on Turnitin. The only thing that they've changed around is their name and the date that it was submitted. And so in an instance of legitimate plagiarism like that, where a student is trying to get credit for work that they didn't do, I play that by the university plagiarism handbook, which is, in short, they've got the flow chart for you at the Office of Student Accountability if you want to check that website. But the general gist of it is that you have to schedule a time to meet with the student. You have to lay out kind of, this is why I think this qualifies as plagiarism. Give that student a chance to respond. There are borderline instances. I've never had one, but I could see how that would happen, where a student does have an explanation for why they did this or that or the other, so it doesn't qualify as plagiarism once you've heard from them. And then if that's the case, that's where it ends. If they agree that they've done plagiarism, if they agree that they've kind of perpetrated that, then you and the student work out what the penalty is going to be for that. Could just be failing that paper, could be you get an F on that paper, but you have to rewrite it. That's between you and the student. And if they agree to that, then that's where it ends. Both of you sign a form to be submitted to the Office of Student Accountability, and that's that. The other possibility is that the student does not agree that it's plagiarism. You think that it's plagiarism. And in that case, it has to be kicked over to the Office of Student Accountability, and they will conduct their own investigation. They'll have a meeting with both of you, and they'll decide from there. It's kind of out of your hands. I've never had to do that at the University of Memphis. I did have to do that one time at the University of Georgia when I taught there. And it's unpleasant, but it's not the end of the world, right? It's a meeting between you and the student and the third party, the mediator from the office, and they decide what's to be done about it, right? So as far as kind of classroom behavior, classroom attitudes, this is something that I think weighs heavily on first-year TAs. and got a lot of questions about it. This one of the questions here is, how do you communicate with students who speak up a lot or too much in class? I say that that's probably the most common behavioral issue that you run into. And I put that in quotes because a lot of times these students are good students, right? And they are kind of participating sincerely. They're oftentimes very conscientious students. And if you let a question hang that you've asked the class, they feel that obligation to say something, right? And so it comes from a good place, but they end up kind of dominating the discussions and shutting out other students unintentionally for the best of reasons. And with those sorts of issues, with the student that's dominating the conversation, I think that the best way to do it is to kind of handle it globally. And by that, I mean, you don't want to be like, Bob, you're talking too much, right? Can you let other students talk? Because that kind of, that can be seen as kind of an attack on them. They may become defensive about that. But I would simply say something like, okay, let's hear from somebody that we haven't heard from today, right? And then that person knows that they are kind of not responding to this question. If you have your students' names memorized, you can always prompt other students to give an answer. But that's my kind of go-to for handling students that are talking too much habitually or talking too much in one discussion, as I just kind of make a comment along those lines of that I want to hear from somebody we haven't heard from today. I want to hear from everybody, and usually that solves it, right? With students that are expressing kind of negative attitudes in class, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording. For me, that's a spectrum, right? That you are, some students are just not happy to be there. And so they do have kind of a negative vibe in class, and that's not really a behavioral issue in my mind. That's just the nature of the beast. Not everybody's excited to be in 1010. It does kind of cross into a potential behavioral issue if they're vocalizing those negative attitudes about you or about their peers, right? And my general kind of guiding principle in handling student issues is that you want to praise in public and you want to criticize in private. So if an issue like that comes up in class where a student is making snide comments or, trashing the course material or whatever, as long as it's not an immediate crisis, I'm going to let it slide. I'm going to talk to that student privately, right? And if you're not comfortable talking with that student privately, you may just email that student privately and say, what's going on here? Can you kind of give me some insight as to why you're behaving like this, talking like this, and just try to solve it in those terms, right? In the rare instances where a student is disrupting class due to their comments, due to being negative or, heaven forbid, aggressive towards another student, which is not something I've ever had to deal with, but it is okay to kind of just shut the conversation down, say, okay, we're not going to continue this right now in class, and then ideally you could talk to that student after class. But you always kind of have that out as a teacher, is that if a conversation is going off the rails, you can just quash it, give people time to kind of calm back down, and then handle it later, right? And I think that's kind of the best practices there. For phones or videos, if somebody's on their phones or playing something on their computer during class, I still try to do praise in public, criticize in private. And so I try not to just say, hey, Joe, turn off your cell phone. That can create a situation where that person feels attacked somewhat. And a simple trick I picked up from Tammy Jones is just walking near the student, right? In the normal course of your lecture, or if it's during a group writing assignment or something like that, when you walk over to that student, you may make eye contact with them. Just let them know that you know what they're doing, and usually they're going to put it away. You can also just kind of do a global reminder to the class. Reminder, everybody, we're not going to be we're not going to be on our cell phones during this time. We're not going to be surfing the internet. No one says surfing the internet anymore. I know that. We're not going to be on social media during this time, and kind of direct it towards everybody. And then that student knows that they need to be putting that away, right? The earbuds thing, students who wear headphones or things like that, I found that I don't even notice it most of the time. I think a lot of my students wear them just as kind of a fashion accessory. And as long as they're participating in class and they are not disrupting other students, it doesn't bother me one bit, right? And so that's kind of my take on classroom management. I let a lot of stuff slide. I try not to address a student directly unless I absolutely have to. And I always try to criticize privately. I try to talk to problem students, pull them aside discreetly after class, invite them to meet me in office hours, send them emails, things of that nature to see, what's going on and why they're behaving the way they do. All right.